And I just want to thank you and your team for putting this together. This is going to be amazing. We're talking about the process of going from employee to entrepreneur. This is something that you've had experience with. I'm relatively new to, and I cannot wait to dive in and lay the path for folks that may be thinking about this route. So, Aaron Ross, thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Hey, David, great to be here. Um, this is interesting enough. This type of event is something we'll talk about, but I'm not sure where you want to start.
Yeah, I
At the
mean,
beginning?
I think folks, if they're not familiar with you, they've probably been living under a rock for the last 10 to 20 years. But obviously an icon in our industry, someone who's made a huge impact on me and so many people that are in the sales development space, in the sales space, marketing space. Pat yourself on the back, man. You deserve it. um, Tell us this. So let's kick it off. And I'm going to be interviewing Aaron here. We'll go back and forth a lot. We'll probably have about 30 minutes of tips and conversation, and then we'll open it up for questions for everybody who's on the webinar. Aaron, if folks aren't familiar with your path, how did you go from the employee route to becoming an entrepreneur? And, I know that we don't have probably enough time to do this, but can you give us a sense of that path for people so that they can kind of orient themselves?
Yeah. Interesting, because I'm going to take a couple notes for myself here at the same time, because it's kind of something I'm been thinking about a bit more. Wow. So, and to keep it simple, I think that when I was younger, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I actually didn't even realize I wanted to be one until I was in my late 20s. And I remember when I first even considered it was when I was filling out a business school application for Stanford, and it said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And it's like, huh, I never actually thought about that. So I'm 48, and I feel like when, at least for me, when I was younger, when we didn't, people asked like, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" It wasn't the same level of awareness of kind of where do you want to go with your life and what the possibilities were, like you have now, like we have now. There were job tracks, even when I was a kid, typically. An entrepreneur just never really came up. It wasn't part of the broad consciousness that I remember. So late 20s. And for me, there was this big shift. The shift really started from it's not if I'll start a business or will I start a business, it's when I'm going to start one. Like basically making this mental shift. It's not, am I going to do it? It's when am I going to do it? Or I am going to do one. I'm just not sure which. And I felt like for me, that's a really important framing because I started to look at things differently that way. I started really to see opportunities I just hadn't even thought about before. It changed. I mean, it sounds like a simple change, but it really changed my perspective. And my daughter said something that it's my 17-year-old Aurora. We have 9 kids, by the way, going on 10. So I'll give you a couple fun facts, actually. 9 going on 10 kids. And I got married only 8 years ago. And there's 4 adopted. And in those 10 years, so I went from, there was a period where I went from making under $100,000 a year, like 70-ish thousand dollars a year. In 4 years, I grew my income by 11 times to 800, like around $800,000 a year. That might sound like a ton of money, but I'll tell you, with a big family, it's crazy how much money a family, when you really are investing in the family. So again, I feel like I've been through these times of I had a business fail, and then I've had it succeed, and I haven't thought about being an entrepreneur, and then I have thought about being one, and all these different kind of positions where it's like, okay, I feel like I have a pretty good perspective on what it means if I was a regular person, because we're all regular in our own ways. I'm really feel like it's just a regular person. Like, where do you start? And for me, it was like that mental perspective shift. So, okay, that's step one. I think I have these little slides here, but that was really the first for me. And then after that, to do something with it is really you're looking for opportunities. So I would say for most people, if you start with like a consulting business, right? So for me, it was really deciding to like some sort of decision or commit a mindset shift. But then it's
This
like,
is
what
when you
can
went
you be
from
doing?
if to when.
Right.
Number
So I
one,
started.
making that commitment. Okay.
Yeah. It may not even be like, it's a more of like a mental shift. It could be a commitment. It's some sort of, um, it's really just like a shift in perspective. So my daughter, Aurora, who's now 17, when she was probably early teens, I don't actually remember what age she was, but she said that when she was younger, and she actually has always had the sense that she would be famous or wants to be famous, right? Who doesn't? But like even when she was a kid, and I would say, oh, okay, well, it's not if you're going to be famous or I don't remember the word. It might have been successful or something, but it'll be when you are. And I wouldn't say that with all my kids, by the way, but I think for her, and it really rang true for her. And she even to this day will say, it's a when, not if. Now, I'll be the first person to say, not everyone is made to be an entrepreneur. Everyone should be entrepreneurial with their lives and work in some way, but that's maybe not, it's harder than people realize to be an entrepreneur in the way we define it. So
Okay.
again, it rang true for her. If it rings true for you, great. If it doesn't ring true, I don't know. Maybe you're not ready for that yet. But so that was the first step. Second step was, what's your real expertise that either you have or you want to have? I think this is a good place to start. Like, what do you, where can you start with what you've done really well or what you are so interested in that you want to do really well? And for me, working at Salesforce.com, that ended up being outbound prospecting and selling, which honestly I had zero idea how that worked before. But I wanted to learn about sales. I had a venture-backed business fail. I'm like, I gotta learn sales. I knew I had to learn it. I had no real interest in it, but I knew I had to learn it. Got into it and happened to have a good head for it. But I think for most people, it's hard because and even for kids, there's just unlimited possibilities today, which is great, but it's also challenging because it's overwhelming. Like, what do I do? So there's this constant, like, there's too many choices. Like, what do I do? But I think where you start is, what have you been best at? Where have you created the most value for people? And honestly, whether you're kind of interested or not, if people were going to hire you for something, say as a consultant, like what would they hire you for? Like start there. Because if
Got
you
it.
have some sort of expertise, that is just going to give you a big leg up on standing out and doing something that people are going to notice and value.
Okay. So you've made this commitment. You're like, I'm going for this. Then the next thing, the usual thing is like follow your passion, like follow what you're passionate about. But it sounds like what you're saying is it's also somebody's got to be out there and paying you for this expertise. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you could follow your passion for days and run out of money, right?
Yeah. I think if you're starting out, I would say follow the value that you've created. So passion is also very misunderstood. Passion and purpose are they're kind of buzzwords, and they can be very confusing to people because we have these assumptions on what passion means and what purpose means. I think a lot of people, the default of passion is, something, something I love, like archery or gardening or cleaning or playing with children or traveling. It can be, but it could also be something like I just developed a passion for sales. It's not something I knew was there. I'm just really interested in it. I wasn't always, and sometimes I'm not, sometimes I am. And purpose, I don't know. I feel like there's so much baggage on those words. And the reality is actually, no matter what you do, you can find passion and purpose in any job you've got. I don't care if you're cleaning dumpsters or toilets or you're a nanny. Like you can stoke passion and purpose no matter what you do. It doesn't have to be some sort of grand save the world thing. I think that just people get sidetracked. So I would say follow the value, follow the money to start. Like it's really hard for people who haven't already, they don't have like a real, maybe it's also follow the interest, like something you're just fascinated by, that's to the extent that you, like you have to have some sort of this momentum. And the momentum may come from you've got a certain expertise already. The momentum may come from having such a drive to learn something and figure something out that you just kind of create this thing. Like we bought this, home almond milk maker. It's called Almond Cow, I think. All right. Someone was like, I want to make almond milk at home and I hate straining bags. I'm so determined to figure this out. I'm going to spend, let's say 2 years figuring out how to make this thing and sell it. Like it takes so much energy to create something, whether it's a product or even a service, and make money from it, that you have to give yourself every advantage. So the safest one is where the value you've created, and or something you're so determined to do that you're just going to figure it out no matter what.
You're gonna go for it, that niche. And the market will determine if it's valuable or not. So you might be the most passionate person around almond milk production and making machines and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, the market will figure out if they want to buy it, right? And then you got to make that determination from there.
And it's a whole nother skill to learn how to make money at things, right? So that's something too that's important, is to learn to treat this idea of making money as a skill. Like, you can learn to play the guitar. Some people are born natural. There's a few people who are naturally born musicians who could just pick things up and play. It's pretty rare, I think. There's a few people who are naturally born money makers and entrepreneurs, right? Pretty rare, like a Richard Branson or Gary Vee. Or most entrepreneurs are homegrown, right? There's a spectrum. So you can learn how to make money like a skill with practice, right? With intention. Hey, I'm going to get good at this. I'm going to learn about how to do it. I'm going to make mistakes, but I'll keep practicing, and you will learn better ways to make money. That's kind of more my boat. I don't think I was not necessarily a natural entrepreneur. I mean, there were some signs earlier, but so this, whatever you do, if you want to make a new almond milk maker, great. Maybe that's your thing. Just because you have a passion for it doesn't mean other people will recognize the value and make money for it. So you have to be prepared to go through this whole learning process. And in one sense, if you start with the skills you're best at that people might hire you for, it gives you a leg up in starting a simple business, like a consulting or services business.
Got it. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because in sports, we're used to, you see like a LeBron James or a Michael Jordan, who very hardworking, 100% into it, but there's also a certain talent level, and they rise to the top, of these things. But you see that in entrepreneurship now, like on social media, where there's certain of some of the people that you mentioned where they're almost like rock stars of entrepreneurship, and it's like a combination of a natural ability and a hard work ethic.
Yeah.
But then there's 99% of everybody else, right, that's out there.
No, 99.999. I mean, how many Gary V's and Richard Bransons? How many LeBron James are there out of all the basketball players, right? So they're horrible examples for most of us.
Yeah.
In the sense of when we compare ourselves to them. If you use them as inspiration, great. But if you compare, like, why can't they? And you don't see all the. It's really hard to see all the grind behind the scenes. What you see is the highlight reel, right? And for entrepreneurs, like, I'm sure whatever you've seen of me, there's probably more of the highlight reels, right? Day in, day out, I've got my version of the grind, right? A lot of it's family. I mean, for me, I work 10 to 30 hours a week, depending on the week, work. I work 100 hours a week as a father, spouse. There's definitely a lot of grind. It's like a nonstop. I think a lot of the people who are successful have some version of that, because it takes so much practice and so much endurance to go the years it can take to kind of break to that level that you think you should get to. It might be going from nothing to a 6-figure salary or a 6-figure business, or maybe it's a 7-figure business. There are a few exceptions, right? People who do it quickly, but again, they're the exceptions. It's great if that happens for you, but you have to be prepared for it to be an ongoing. Like if you want to be a great guitar player, a master, or even like a master, like a brown belt master, it's going to be 5 to 10 years. I'm just picking. I don't really know what it is. I'm just picking years. It's not going to be 2 years unless you don't have a job and you can play all day, every day. Which how many people can do that? A few,
Right.
some. I can't.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway is like, don't buy into this instant microwave, like overnight success that you see out there, because first, like to your point, you have to decide if this is something you want to do, not if, but when. And then the next one, give yourself a better chance to succeed by focusing on that niche that you can do that provides value versus maybe just something that you're super passionate about. If you could combine those two, great. But if not, you got to make money as an entrepreneur to pay the bills. And so, what value can you provide initially? And it's not as rosy as it looks on Instagram. I mean, there's there's a lot of work behind the scenes and rejection and things like that. So
The
what are some other,
bullshitting.
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
And by the way, a lot of the entrepreneurs that put stuff on Instagram, of course, people are only going to share the highlights.
Yeah.
So what they don't share is like when they lose clients, there's horrible, all the shit that goes down, because first of all, that's the last thing people want to write about or post when that's happening. Sometimes they do it later. Um, I don't know how in predictable revenue I wrote about it, but had all kinds of other problems. I don't bother writing about them. Just whether it's everyone's got personal, professional problems. That's kind of life. So there's not some state where you're not going to have problems. You're not going to have, like, it just doesn't exist where you don't have money problems or personal problems. There's always some things going on. But it's
Always those
better to be,
issues. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, think about it. If you did some pros and cons, the pros about being an entrepreneur, great. Yeah, you get more flexible time. You can make more money. You can also make less money. You can sort of define what you want to do to some extent. And so you can probably make some pros, be good exercise. But the pros of having a job, like having a stable salary, and you can get paid to learn, having a structure, having a team. So there's a lot of great things about being an employee when you work with good people that you often give up for sometimes years when you go out on your own. Just I know that there's probably for years. I have just kind of a weird life in my own way, so I'm not really like a comparison with like so many kids. And I work remotely. We have a company that's going from ideally to $7 million this year, and from 50 to 100 employees. I just, yeah, I don't
That's
know. It's just
huge.
like you kind of like let yourself. Just things take years longer than you want.
Yeah.
And if you can always go back and double down on the things you're best at, which is often, I find for myself, kind of an ongoing discovery what that is. So I'm just going to jump a couple of these. So for me, I know partnering is just, for me at least, huge. I'm great at lots of things. I'm just really not great at others. So even right now, I have a co-CEO of predictablerevenue.com. He's great at things like hiring, team building, the finances of the company, like running the company, like the sort of the 3 to 6 to 12 month view of the company, structure, getting things done, leadership, management, accountability, and which are a lot of things I'm not great at. I was really good in some situations back at like Salesforce, but with my family, like what I'm great at are things like content and ideas and partnerships and new relationships and other, sort of longer term views. But of all other partners, like a lot of my books, I've always had a partner with each book, right? It just, for me, partnering, and I do a lot of partnering with marketing with partners. So I'm just someone who really appreciates partners. I enjoy them. They add a lot of scale. They help create structure for me and accountability. And the fourth one, like
This is
as you start,
interesting. And if just a quick
yeah,
note on that, I think something that I've learned in going from an employee to an entrepreneur is when you're an employee, they're hiring you to do this particular job, and so especially as you're coming up through the ranks, you're expected to kind of be the master of this thing and know pretty much everything of what to do. And it's a very different scenario when you go to entrepreneurship, because you literally can't know everything of what's going on in the business, and how to bring in business, and how to spend money correctly, and how to hire people, and the million of other things, right? And so I think someone who's you come up through the educational system to be a specialist in this one thing, and then to be thrown into like this open ocean of, I can't do everything. I'm actually a bottleneck. It was kind of a weird revelation. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know it's hard, at least for a lot of people, including myself, to learn how to like delegate.
Yeah.
I feel it's hard because again, I have multiple projects, and anyway, so it's a whole other thing. But finding good partners, and I've had,
Yeah.
I had a couple business partners that didn't work out early before I found my current main one. I've had again like different partners for books. A lot of like here, we're doing a partner webinar here. So for me, it's really fundamental to the way I work, finding partners I trust.
Yeah. It's almost like a yin and yang kind of, if you're just one side of a yin, you're bumping along and everything's really, really hard. But if you can
Yeah.
find that partner that smooths things out, you're rolling, man. So I love that.
I put this, creating a signature piece or case study, I
Yeah.
think is important. Now, if you're creating a product, anyway, what people value today more than ever is like a case study, like a story around someone else like them who saw success. That could be a review on Amazon. It could be, again, like a little video of someone who's your almond milk maker. It could be a consulting project. But ideally, if you're in business to business, if you do consulting, you want to show people how did you make the money is ideal. Um, Predictable Revenue, the book, was my first signature piece or case study. It could be a video, and it could be something else. It could be a signature, something kind of showcases your work that you can share. Right? And I think that people struggle with this because it can take some practice. It's hard to create content that stands above. It's so noisy these days. It's hard to create great content or pieces that really stand out to people, but it's important.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I'm sure a lot of the folks that are on here might be looking at starting a software company. And, so you spend a bunch of money to make the software, and then you give it out to people. And so in that case, you would look for a great use case of a case study that you could then publish and be known for. Is that correct?
Yeah, ideally.
Okay.
And because it's one thing to have a demo, and that's great. So that could be a first version. And by the way, sorry, a lot of these things can take, like, you can start working on them in the early days. They might take years to kind of click into place in the way that you want them to, right? To find the right. It probably took me I don't know. It took me years to find the right partner. It took me a few years to kind of nail my niche. And part of that was because outbound prospecting, which is kind of my main business niche, was something I left Salesforce. I resisted it for a while and did some other stuff for a few years before I came back to it when I got married.
Yeah.
So I don't think this isn't so much a linear path in a line. It's probably more of like a circle. You kind of go back and you decide to do it, focus on expertise, find the right partners, create content, and so on. And what also for me helps drive this are these become forcing functions.
Hmm. This is
I'm
great.
not, I'm not naturally as super motivated as it seems like Elon Musk is. I mean, maybe no one is, but there are a few people. My wife tends to be like this, which are people are super self-motivated. They just kind of do stuff. I can often tend to procrastinate. I put things off. I don't know. So I do stuff, but sometimes to do that next level, like to publish a book, I put that off for a few years after leaving Salesforce, for like 5 years. Now it worked out because in those 5 years, I had tested the ideas, and I did consulting and so on. It was a better book for it. But for me, what works are forcing functions, and The example I would say is when you commit to doing something publicly. For example, if you say you want to get back in shape, do you A, join a gym, or B, do you sign up for a marathon or a triathlon and tell all your friends you're going to do it? Right. Another one is
Yeah.
if you say, hey, I'm gonna hold an event on March 3rd. I'm gonna hold a meetup, a webinar, da, da, da. And you create a landing page and you tell people, then you got to do it. So you get a partner for something and then you kind of agree to dates and things. So those are forcing functions, and they work for me. They're the main thing that basically helps me manufacture motivation. If I don't feel it myself, no matter kind of how tired or uninspired I feel, or how little time I have.
I love that. That's such great advice. And it reminds me, there's this great book called War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And if you haven't read that and you're on the call, that is a really life changing book. But he talks about how, you know, there's this thing called resistance, and resistance just shows up in multiple forms and stands between us and the dreams that we have and what we're trying to create. And everybody battles resistance. And it kind of made me think, like, you know, you get up and you're like, all your resistance is pushing up against you, but you look at your calendar and you go, okay, I've got 2 months to do this, or else it's going to be worse than resistance, so I better get on this.
Yeah, and that works for me.
That's
And
great.
I know I can't remember if you actually published it or not, but I think in webinar invite, hey, we'll talk about going from an employee to entrepreneur, and plus hear about Aaron's next book.
Mm.
So, you know, it's like a little baby step towards like one of the ways I start to create something new is I'll maybe mention I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z. I'm thinking about doing a book, or and first just thinking about it. At some point, I'll say I will do it. I'm actually not quite at that point, even though I've got an early draft I'm working on. I'm not sure what the book will be. So, and honestly, it's like just this Word document right now.
Oh,
I don't like,
nice.
yeah,
You
forcing
saw it
functions
here
and
first, folks.
yeah, we'll see. Achieve massive results one step, tiny step at a time. I don't know. I just kind of open it up and see if I write some stuff on it. It
There you
doesn't feel
go.
that, you know, the thing is like, it doesn't feel that great. You know, by the way, resistance, right? And I don't know about all of you, but most people, myself included, I'll write stuff like, God, you know, this is just, eh. Sometimes I like, wow, okay, this is great. And a lot of times like, eh, no one's gonna like this. This feels like shit. Blah, blah, blah. So part of this resistance is to keep going, right? To keep finding ways to, if you do content or need to do content, to kind of put it out there and crystallize it. If it's a software product, to get the beta out or the version out and get it into people's hands, right? To get your stuff into people's hands. But there's always, you know, busyness too can be another form of resistance. Like my wife will keep herself so busy, almost like I think there's even in the book I mentioned. Are you when you deal with is your resistance more something you deal with like a deer in headlights, like you get paralyzed, which is kind of like more like me, like, or do you deal with like a rabid chihuahua where you're just like spinning in circles so quickly you lose direction, like where you're going, what you're doing?
Yeah,
So
that's a good question, because somebody else, I don't think it was Pressfield, but somebody else brought up resistance characters. And so there's like
yeah,
and now we're getting into multi-personalities, and maybe this is what entrepreneurship does to you. So a warning, but resistance characters are like, we all have these different characters, and you can even name them.
oh
So,
yeah,
you know, I've got like um, uh, overwhelmed, you know, Dave, and then I've got Chihuahua Dave, who's like trying to do everything, and then all these different ways that it manifests it. But a long way to answer, yeah. Sometimes we've got so many ideas, and there's so many tabs open, and there's so many different directions that we could take, that you sit down at your computer to actually do some work, and you're like, oh my God, I don't even know where to start.
yep. Or again, like a book, like what do I do? It just feels so overwhelming. So baby steps, right? How do you eat the elephant? Well, either both baby steps, at least for me. So the big commitments like forcing functions, right? Commit to an event by a date, right? This webinar with Dave is a forcing function for me. You brought it up, but you know, this kind of like new content I've been thinking about. Um, so this is a way to start to, okay, what are the ideas? Like, what do people want? And to talk about the ideas. And your book or your blog post, your video, all that stuff typically would be better if you share it with people and you talk about it, kind of flesh it out before you create it. Predictable Revenue, the book, which has sold more than 100,000 copies, I don't know how many it sold, was a much better book because for years I did events, I did workshops, I did some consulting and kind of tested it all, talked to people about it. And by the time I published it, it was a much tighter book with much better, simpler ideas than if I had done it 5 years earlier before it was just kind of like theoretical and wrote it all out. So this is a
Good
chance to
point.
talk to people about it.
And I think everyone's on this, we talked about this, but it's like that timeline that you have to be a success, immediately and
No, yeah,
post a picture of your Lambo on on Instagram. That not
yeah,
not everybody wants to do that, but it's like you get this warped sense of timing. But I think your advice is so great because if you nail your niche and you can offer value, you're going to be making some bucks. You can have some runway to be able to start airing out these different ideas and make something better. And then by the time you actually release it, whether it's the content or the product or something like that, it's better. It's what people really want. And the timeline doesn't really matter.
yeah. So, I mean, if you can give yourself a couple years of runway, but I mean, everybody's different. And some people having money in the bank actually hurts them because it demotivates them because they're not as hungry. And other people, like for me, having, it's very motivating having a big family with big bills. Like again, it's just crazy how much things cost. Like
That's a
in the, we just moved,
forcing function right there, times
absolutely.
9, right?
I wrote about it in the Impossible to Inevitable book.
Mm.
And in fact, like our food bill was $4,000 or $5,000 a month. Now we just moved with the 5 youngest kids to Edinburgh, so our food bill should be a lot lower for people. But yeah, it's just crazy the cost of a big family when you're investing in the family. So I'll give you one example. Like a lot of the kids went to private school, not all. I mean, like we really wanted to find a good school that fit the right kid, and some of the kids were a good fit for public, and some weren't. A lot of them, most weren't. And the pain of having a kid in the wrong school is worse than the pain of dealing with paying for a private school, right? So, kind of like go back to like what's more painful, paying for the school or dealing with the kid who's in the wrong school? So there's like so anyway, a lot of these answers more, between we had to get like nannies and rent and private school and food, all just all adds up. So going back to a couple of these, I will point out like when I ramped my income so quickly, I got married, we had kids. I was like, I had to make more money. So that really forced me to focus on my niche, to find a partner, to publish a book, to commit to doing more events. And then another one was just doubling my deal size. Now, if you have, at the point you've started something, you're making a little bit of money, almost everyone charges too little in the early days. Okay, you want to test things out, but as soon as you see some traction, you want to raise your prices. So whether you double them or triple them or 50% or 5 times 5, there's usually a lot of room to grow your prices, especially as you find that customer who needs you. When you find your specialty, it makes it easier to raise your prices. And it's a lot easier to serve 10 customers at $1,000 it is than to serve 20 customers at $500. So one more thing here on this sheet, do the time, right? It can take years, right? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I've probably been at this seriously for, I've been at entrepreneurship, let's call this run since Salesforce since 2006. So about 13 years. And I feel like I'm still just hitting things like the stride, like a lot of like things that seeds I planted. I made a lot. It wasn't just by money. So it's not just amount of money. There's also like team and stress. There's all these other factors. Like, okay, things are getting better. They keep getting better. It's been years and years.
You're
And
figuring
people,
it out.
I know,
And Aaron,
doesn't take.
a note just came in. Can you show your slides? Because we're still looking at the book. The book looks really good though, folks, so far.
Oh, we are.
I
Sorry.
love it. But
Actually, I thought it was. Oops.
just want to make sure that we get those points.
Is this? Do we get it?
There we go. There it is. Got it.
Okay. So I thought it
Simple.
was on. I
We got
had.
simple steps. There we go. Okay.
Gotcha. Sorry.
No
Yeah,
problem.
I had on my
So
screen. So
okay, so now you've got the case study. So you have a story, and you're forcing yourself in, and now you're saying, we don't charge enough. Double your deal size, because you've got the proof that you can show value in
yeah.
your practice. Okay.
Yep. So that's going to be easier. Like if you're just going to say, hey, I'm going to do a first consulting project. You can do this quickly. If you're building a software product and you don't have anything, but also another way you can support a software company is often people do side projects and contracting to pay the bills. A lot of people, you don't need to raise money to start a company. Some people do, a lot of people don't. Honestly, the best way to fund a company can be a salary.
Hmm.
So,
It's interesting because there's so much press and um, you know articles and posts and stuff about people who uh, have a software product, and then they go get some money, and they become the next like unicorn and stuff like that. But you don't really hear much about people who do something on the side, or they stop their job and they bootstrap to X amount. It seems like it's not as fashionable to hear about stuff like that.
yeah, it's not like the major, you don't see that in the major news outlets. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of like companies and people who blog about that, and coaches. If there's lots of coaches, I can remember the guys, Ramit Sethi, who, has this whole thing like make your first $1,000 on the side. And there's lots of side hustle coaches, and there's lots of stuff, but yeah, it's more on the fringe. It doesn't get the same attention as, Uber raises a big round of money. Like basically a lot of these businesses that are irrelevant to us, but it's just kind of interesting to see it's news. It's exciting news.
Yeah,
And most people's news
big
isn't
money.
that exciting. Like regular life is just not that exciting in terms of news.
Yeah, I made
Mine,
payroll this week. How come you're not
seriously,
writing about that? Right?
who wants to share that? Like, I didn't know if I'd make until later. So, but that's how everyone, I mean, that's what it's like for most people. Like for parents, I don't know how many people here are parents, but kind of like, oh, the shit you got to deal with as a parent. When most of the bloggers and people posting, and I do this, I'll post all the cute things on Instagram because, and sometimes I'll do things like, okay, here's someone crying, but usually if they're crying or other things, I'm like, doesn't really feel appropriate to stop and video it. I'll do it once in a while just as a memory, but so there's a lot of reasons why people post positive things and not negative things. I don't think that's going to change. But that's not a reflection. It's a very small slice of their life and day. Just as think about what you post, is that really representative of your day-to-day life? Unlikely.
Exactly. And so you have to do the time, and it's like the entrepreneurship is almost like self-reflection, because you learn a lot about yourself doing it. So it seems like if you're that really driven like type of person, you can stay motivated because you're always going on to the next thing. But how do you stay motivated with the headwinds that come at you as an entrepreneur constantly? I mean, you've got like your kid's got the flu, and you're not feeling that great, and you just lost a big deal, and you don't know how you're going to make the payments for all these things. Like how do you stay motivated? Forcing functions?
Well, you have to do it
Okay.
because bills to pay for kids. I've got a date for the conference because you have to do it. You can't because
Yeah.
you have to do it. That's how I do it. Because I
Great
mean,
advice.
big family, business. Trust me, there's so many days I just like, oh, I'm so done. I'm so done. I don't have anything else. And someday I'll have to put a movie on. We don't like screens. We do Friday night movie night, but like, I got to put a movie on for the kids because I just need a break.
Yeah.
Or at work, sometimes it's just everyone's got those times, but the forcing functions are what I use to work for me to kind of really power me forward, whether I have the time, energy, inspiration. I used to write when I was inspired, and I haven't done that for a while. I would like to again. I haven't gotten there quite yet. But the forcing functions is a little bit baby steps towards there. So in some sense, I'm actually using my own advice to do the next thing, right? Deciding and committing on a next book, and what would that niche be? it's kind of, in this case, it'd be more like, what I've learned in blending, making a lot of money while having a big family. Like one of my talks was called Building a $5 million business while raising 10 kids. So signature piece
Good
would be the next
title.
book. So I'm kind of doing this myself again, right? Going back on the wheel again. And there's many reasons. It's partly I want to do some, I'm not predictablerevenue.com is still like the foundation. So this isn't, but I also, part of me is the new areas and the new explorer, breaking new ground partner
And
of that
if
business.
you've done the time, you've gotten to the point where you've got some momentum. If someone came to you and was like, "Hey, you're Aaron Ross, you're famous in our industry. We'll give you this big job where we'll take care of everything, your whole family, like benefits, all this stuff, and it's a cake job with lots of money." Would you take it, or would you stick with what you're doing?
Theoretically, like if it was, like if enough money and the flexibility to do what I was already doing, I mean, I don't know, look at it. I don't have an aversion to being necessarily employed by someone. And, it all depends on the situation. Like, who would it be with? What would I be doing? How much money would I make
Yeah.
for how much time? And like, what kind of, it's all, I don't know. Like, there's a good, the movement of like cubicles are evil. Yeah, I get that. And a lot of work. Yeah, I get that kind of the job thing. People don't want to be in a job at a desk. I get that. Having said that, there's nothing inherently wrong with jobs or cubicles, or it's kind of like how you do it, who you work with, what you're trying to get out of it. The only person who can really enslave you is you.
Mm.
And there's lots of things to love about jobs, like a stable salary. Oh my God, benefits, hopefully,
Yeah.
a chance to get paid to learn. If you look at it that way versus feeling trapped in something where it's like a lot of it's your perspective. It could be a great launching point towards something next. The Salesforce, I went to salesforce.com with the idea of I'm going to stay here. I'm going to learn how to do sales and build sales teams. And before I do my next thing, right? Because you can't learn through reading. You can read some things through reading books, but ultimately when you apply it is when you learn the most. Now you can read my books. Okay, great. But it's not until you do it or other people's books. So
Yep.
let's do this. If you have some questions, I got one more set of slides. Okay, what do you do first? I'll just put those up on the page here.
Yeah.
And if you have questions, we could do some discussion, right? So
And
here's some
I
simple.
have one question from Raluca.
Yeah.
So Raluca, if you're still on the call, we'll definitely get to that. So where do we
So
start with this, Aaron?
yeah. Now it's kind of like from a little bit bigger to smaller, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
If you really feel bold, host your own event, right? David, you did that. Yeah.
Yep.
That's probably a big, it's a lot to do your own big event. You could do a small event. I started with like a dinner with a few people. You could do a coffee, meetup. There's so many ways. You could do a webinar. You can host, but if you host your own event, it again forces you to think about who would I invite? What would it be about? What would they get from it? And you do that again and again. It just creates clarity. A simpler step is speak at someone else's event or contribute in some way. That'd be another way to describe it. And a great way to start interviewing people you're interested in, people you want to learn from. It's a great way to create content plus learn plus build your network. You could even create an interview series. And does it really matter if anyone listens to it? Not really. I mean, fourth one is find some sort of guide, right? A mentor, hire a coach, a boss that you like, someone that who's already been down there, you can learn from. And the last, I think mostly for me, it works so well as partners. Think about if you're starting a new exercise regimen, having a workout buddy, someone to show up for, makes a big difference. And also someone who can kind of see what you're better at, see what you're not as good at. So these are just they're not tiny baby steps. Like a tiny baby step would be sitting down and making a list of URLs or company names. So these are a bit bigger, but these are all simple ways that you can get started depending on your boldness level, where you are.
I love that. And so this is, a lot of the folks on the call they have a job right now, and so they've got all those benefits and everything, but they could potentially do some of this on the side. And I would also just add, if you're thinking about just quitting your job and starting something, then you also got to think about how much does it cost you to live, and how much like runway do you have before you're going to be eating top ramen and like sleeping on somebody's couch. Not an
You
option
can do
for me and Aaron right now, but you know, if you're like younger and you don't have all these obligations, I mean, you don't really
kids.
need that much. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are all things you don't need to quit to do all these. You could do these, like I said, on the side. There's lots of things you could do while you're at a job. And I'll say, when I was at Salesforce, I started writing my first blog. Blogs were illegal at Salesforce back in the day, but just for myself to find my voice. I met a lot of people through Salesforce. Like I was building my network inside Salesforce and outside, created my blog. There's a lot of like seed planting there, and there's a lot you could do at your current job. I would say, like I have a daughter who wants to start restaurant. You know, start like a restaurant, do a new restaurant someday, or maybe like a nail salon. Like, well, the best way to do that is get a job in a restaurant. Like,
Just
you
jump
need to
in
learn
there.
how the place works from the ground up in order to be really good at it. It'd be
Yeah.
really expensive to just start a restaurant from scratch and kind of, if you hadn't worked in it, like you can do that. It's gonna waste a lot of money. Versus if you even worked in one as a dishwasher, as a waiter, or something.
Yeah, I can give an example because we put together the sales development market map, and a lot of the companies want to call me and do a demo of the product, and a lot of them are very technical, and I love them all, but it's like, have you ever been an SDR before? like 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 so, you know, right there, like if you're an SDR and you're listening to this and you're like, I've got this one thing that's driving me crazy. I mean, you might not love being an SDR in this whole industry, but you do have a pain point, and that could be a clue to something that could really add value out there in the marketplace, stuff like that. So I did have a question, and this is kind of tied in, Aaron. Um, you know, Raluca asked, any books. We talked about The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I mean, I would just recommend anybody read that if you're trying to create something. But any books that, other than for obviously Predictable Revenue and From Impossible, Aaron, that you've read that have made a big impact and help you, um, you know, in your in this endeavor.
Um, I don't. I've read a lot of books in the past. I haven't read much in the last few years.
Any other resources that
I
you'd
just think
rely
about,
on?
like, there's just some books I really liked. Like, I just look for interesting books. Like, one the two most influential books on my sales career, one was called The Toyota Way.
Mm.
Right? I was just really interested in kind of lean manufacturing and Six Sigma. Um, and the other one was called Wooden, basically a UCLA basketball coach's management style. So I kind of like to just find interesting things and see how it apply the principles to whatever I was doing. Right. And so even as a parent and entrepreneur, I think, what am I learning as an entrepreneur that I might apply to family and vice versa, which sometimes there's things that cross over. Sometimes I'm just too tired to make the connections. Um, I can't think right now. Like, I always love the book Four Agreements,
Mm.
and I'm sure I can't think of any books dead on that I would recommend. I've heard
Yeah.
good things about the War of Art, right? Isn't that what it is?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And there's a book called Resistance. I think the same. I haven't read it, but similar things, which is identifying. There's what you want to get to, and there's that struggle. And I think it's really about knowing yourself, being able to spot your weaknesses, your habits. My daughter, Aurora, is super procrastinator, like unbelievable. And I mean, she's 17. So like even she says, "Hey, Dad, I want to post regularly on social media. So, and I really want a new phone. So what if I post regularly, then you'll pay for the phone as a way to get it's a way to get herself to post, really."
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay. Now, she hasn't quite been that successfully, but it's kind of like that kind of thinking, which is, how do I work around myself, focus on my strengths. I don't try to not only fix weaknesses, but work around them. Someone else recommended the Personal MBA.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have liked, what's the What's the Artist Way book? Isn't that what it's called?
That sounds familiar. I can't remember the author right now.
It's more
Yeah,
like getting in touch with your creativity, and I think feeling comfortable more creating things,
the
getting
artist
into
way.
habit like creating. A lot of it's based on fear and just habitual thoughts. This fear of like it takes so much energy to change our habits. It takes so much energy.
Yeah,
Like we think it's easy. It's so hard to change the way we think in our habits. So for me, again, it really takes this huge outside force, like having a child, getting married, having a big bill, like these basically unmovable, unchangeable things that I have to fix. I have to change myself to adapt to, because otherwise there's just so much resistance to change.
yeah,
And
and you're basically like, dude, I have no choice. It's like we got burn the ships. Like we're going in. Um, and I had one I wanted to add. If you are going the consulting route, which I think you've mentioned is a great way to get some money coming in, and yeah,
ahead of
not
ourselves.
not necessarily,
The great way
but
to start and practice, and because
yeah,
consulting first, again, all these it can be a lot of ups and downs and take a year or two or however long it takes to get to the point of like learning not only how to get clients and how to get leads, but to how to charge and get the it's a lot. Um,
that's true.
it's simpler than lots of other things. So, and there might be again sometimes simpler ways to make money. One of them is if you have a good network, having an event can be one,
Hmm.
consulting. So, but there's pros and cons to everything you do. So a lot of it comes down to what do you feel called to do? What do you feel like you need to do? And kind of at some point jumping in and just realize you're going to have to figure it out as you go to some extent. Like there's no copy paste success. There's a lot of places you can get guidance, but it's kind of like a diet. You can't just copy someone's diet and expect to get the same results. You always need to adjust it because everyone's body is different.
You got to figure it out. That's great. And so to that extent, I'll add one more book to the list. That really helped me a lot. It's called How Clients Buy, and it's by people in the consulting industry who it's totally different than if you're selling like a software service or a consumer product to get into the buying cycle. So it's called How Clients Buy. So, Aaron, this has been amazing. We're getting up to the top of the hour. Just see if we have any more questions. Thank you, everybody, for jumping in. The Personal MBA by Josh Kaufman. I have not read that myself. Aaron, have you read that one?
I haven't.
Okay,
I haven't. Sure, there's
so
lots of good books out there.
now we've got our homework to do. I've got one more question for you before we go, Aaron. A little bit off topic, but who's your favorite James Bond actor and why? And so I found Goldeneye on Netflix last night, and I thought it was amazing. Um, but of all the different ones, Sean Connery, Roger Moore, etc., who's your favorite?
I grew up with Roger Moore, but so I gotta say, Sean Connery is number one because he was just the original, and actually he's from Scotland. Um, Roger Moore would be number two, but then Daniel Craig. He did one movie. I can't remember which one it was. It was so good. Castle Roy was it the Royale one? Now another one was horrible after, but the first one he did, it was also just one of the best James Bond movies in a long time because they've been such crap for so long. But Sean Connery would be number one.
So a lot of people go with Sean Connery because he was the original one, but you and I are from the same
There's this
generation. So
side
I
on him.
I go with Roger Moore because he's the one. He doesn't age well though. If you go back and watch the movies now and you watch how he acts and stuff, it doesn't look too good. So yeah, I might have to go with Sean Connery, or even Pierce Brosnan is pretty damn good too. So
He's I put him in the B, like yeah,
yeah, he's pretty good.
yeah.
So Aaron, this has been amazing. I hope it's helpful for everybody. If you're thinking about making this move, I think Aaron summarized it just right. It's like any other system. It's not going to be right for everybody. There's a lot of subtleties. It's not as clear cut as your Instagram feed, but I mean, I personally have really enjoyed the journey. And Aaron, Thank you so much. We've learned so much from you. So keep it
Yeah.
up, man.
Yeah. Thanks. Appreciate it. And uh, love to hear from people. If there's something that kind of struck a chord, put my email in here more than others, because I'm also still looking for feedback on like what's the most helpful thing or what do people want. But I'd love to hear from people. So thanks for putting this together, David.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll shoot an email over to Aaron, learn more about predictable revenue and how it might be able to help. If you're starting a company and you need to kick off your outbound, hook up with predictable revenue for sure. This is the master. So thank everybody for jumping on, and we'll see you at the next webinar.